Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. As we know, Mr. Viktor Orban is Hungary's right-wing populist, um, anti-Islam, largely anti-immigration, and then more or less Eurosceptic prime minister. He first was in office from 1998 to 2002, and since returning to power in 2010, he has faced a weak and divided opposition. Short of some political or other miracle, it seems that his rule over Hungary will be secure at least for another term or two. Of course, anything can happen in politics. He claims that by barring those Middle Eastern, mostly Syrian refugees from his country, by erecting those border barriers, and then through various other measures, such as constitutionally defining marriage as the union between one man and one woman, that step I do agree with, as a Bible-believing Christian. He claims that through such actions, he's defending Europe's Christian culture. But is that really the case? And then again, how Christian is Europe? While a clear majority of Europe's 700 million plus inhabitants are still nominally members of Christian churches, the church attendance in many countries is low, less than 10%, in various countries less than 5%. To take an example, in my distant native land, Finland, only maybe something like 2 to 3% of the people regularly attend church at least once a week. The figure might be somewhat higher if we considered the mostly unregistered house churches and house fellowships and similar Christian microgroups meetings. And in Hungary itself, the church attendance is low. Mr. Orban, or Prime Minister Orban, I should call him, is himself a member of the Hungarian Reformed Church, which is a Calvinist denomination. According to one Christian or maybe Catholic website, he was confirmed in the 1990s. Then again, whether he ever has had a new birth experience is doubtful, or at least I haven't seen anything in the media that would support that. And such an allegation. And according to the Operation World book, Pray for the World, published by the International Interdenominational, and then I would assume moderately charismatic missions organization, and of course evangelical one as well. Operation Mobilization. At least the article about Hungary is not super positive or super optimistic, although it's certainly not a hopeless one either. Let's read. So operationworld.org, country, Hung, meaning Hungary, and then owtext.hlm, and then there are these slashes between org and country, between country and Hung, and between Hung and owtext.html. Only 2.8% of Hungary's population are classified as evangelicals, code name, largely for then those people would be considered born-again Christians, although of course most Pentecostal and charismatic Christians are also born again. Christians, according to this statistic, would comprise almost exactly 88% of Hungarians. And the annual growth in the percentage of Christians would be minus, or would have been minus 0.5, but for evangelicals plus 0.9. So challenges for prayer: expatriate missions increased numerically in the 1990s, but have since leveled off. Pray for sensitivity and a true servant attitude in seeking to help the Hungarian church. The main ministries required of expatriates are leadership training and mentoring, equipping the laity, in other words, those church members who are not officially ordained to any ministerial position, and imparting missionary vision. The Hungarian missions movement is still in its infancy, but the great promise is beginning to be realized. A missions expo recently attracted 20,000 people. The largest agencies are CCCI, so probably Campus Crusade for Christ International, YWAM, meaning Youth with a Mission, RG, I don't know what that means, ABWE, Greater Grace World Outreach. Then Christian Help Ministries, a scripture distribution. The Hungarian Bible Society was revitalized in 1989. Pray for its ministry in distributing the Bible. B, Christian literature is in demand. Many new Christian publishing companies have been founded. The need continues for Christian books written in Hungarian that communicate the gospel to non-Christians in today's language and idioms. The Hungarian Literature Mission is a major source of evangelistic materials. C, Christian media. In addition to many broadcast hours a week in Hungarian by TWR, probably the acronym for Transworld Radio, opportunities are increasing for local Christian programs on TV and radio. Hungarian Gospel Radio Foundation and the Reformed and Lutheran churches have their own radio programs. The internet and a host of Christian websites offer another means for discipling believers and reaching out to non-Christians. And I have read, at least haphazardly, if I remember correctly, 2 versions of this Operation World or Pray for the World book. And I think that based on the glimpses I still remember, they offer quite spiritually sharp and insightful understandings of the state of the gospel preaching and especially living out the gospel in many countries of the world. And while there is cause for optimism regarding Hungary, still nowhere do we read in this short spiritual overview of Hungary news of a great spiritual revival. Of course, people are getting saved in Hungary wherever the gospel is preached truly and lived out. People are getting saved, whether in smaller or bigger numbers. But at least I haven't heard of any huge spiritual revival touching Hungary during the already over 12 years of Prime Minister Orban's term. And whether he himself is a true follower of Jesus Christ is doubtful, despite his claims of defending the Christian faith. But then again, Donald Trump also, or the Christian culture. Donald Trump would probably make a similar claim, but the news of his alleged born-again experience are largely, if not mostly, contradicted by his continuing nasty behavior. And then while Prime Minister Orban has reintroduced religious education to Hungary's schools, even, the question is how many of the teachers are actually true followers of Jesus Christ. I assume if it is to be confessional, that they must be either members or at least affiliates of some Christian church or churches, but that of course is no guarantee that they are actually true followers of Jesus. I assume that there must be a number of private Christian schools in Hungary, and I'm I'm very glad about that. Then there's another issue that Prime Minister Orban seems not to care too much about the truth, or actually seems to oppose the truth being published when his own shortcomings and his government's shortcomings and unjust policies are concerned. And recently I read and even filmed a video about the possibility that his government is actually, by favoring certain kinds of textbooks, distorting the history education or history teaching in Hungary. I believe that the truly born-again Christians should be concerned about that, because truth should be one of the pillars of the Christian faith. Also humility. And at least based on the image or images I have of Mr. or Prime Minister Orban, he seems very self-satisfied, even cocky and arrogant by his facial expression, throwing his head backward like this. So religion in Hungary, according to the 2011 census, 37.1% or over 1/3 profess to be Roman Catholics, 1.8% Greek Catholics, 11.6% Calvinists or Reformed, 2.2% Lutherans, 0.3% Muslims, 1.6% followers of other religions, 16.7% non-religious, 1.5% atheists, but over 1/4, 27.2% undeclared. So while Christianity, both Roman Catholicism and Calvinism especially, they both have a strong history in Hungary, how much of that history is lived out in the people's daily lives? How many Hungarians are truly following Jesus Christ, not just professing to be his followers, but trying to live every day in a godly way? And while it is wonderful that Prime Minister Orban's government has decided to pass a constitutional amendment defining biblically, I would say, at least in principle, marriage as the union of one man and one woman. I say in principle because in practice probably divorce and remarriage, divorce is easier than in the Bible, and remarriage is almost certainly allowed. And yes, there might be legislation that has restricted access to abortion. There might be legislation that has made the homosexual global movement's propaganda more difficult to access and has possibly reduced pornography. While all of that is wonderful, none of that is specifically born-again Christian. And indeed, there are conservative Jews and Orthodox Jews. There are conservative Muslims who would agree with much of that. So, for example, defining marriage as the union of one man and one woman would find a deep support among the conservative and Orthodox Jews, less support among the liberal Reformed Jews. And then, of course, the Muslims would still abide by their holy book, the Quran, according to which a man can have up to 4 wives, subject to certain conditions, of course. So, to what extent Prime Minister Orban's alleged defense of the Christian culture is based on his own personal Christian faith, if he has any, in the born-again biblical sense, and to what extent it is catering to a certain section of the Hungarian electorate, remains doubtful. We really don't know. However, when it comes to treating strangers mercifully, Prime Minister Orban had better read through the Gospels again and try to start applying what the Gospels say. When it comes to not slandering fellow human beings on the basis of their outward characteristics, when it comes to forgiving one's enemies and praying for those who persecute us, or in this case, who speak nastily towards or about Prime Minister Orban and his followers, then I just wonder how accurately Prime Minister Orban is following the teachings of Jesus Christ, whom he at least nominally professes to follow. And then we would have to study the Hungarian Reformed Church, to what extent there is spiritual life in it, to what extent its pastors are urging their congregations to seriously examine their hearts to find out if they are true believers or not. To what extent is the Hungarian Reformed Church spreading the gospel, at least according to that glimpse into Hungary's recent spiritual condition, according to the, or as provided by the Pray for the World book on the internet. It seems that evangelism is not that common in Hungary. And then again, many other European countries could make the claim we are a Christian country. I think the only, should I say, inner or core European country where a majority of the people are not even nominally Christians, but actually profess another international religion, is Albania in southeastern Europe. It is a majority Muslim country. Of course, if we include such borderline countries as Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, let alone Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, then of course we find several majority Muslim countries. But I think that Prime Minister Orban should learn humility. He alone cannot defend Europe's Christian faith or culture. And he is not the highest defender either. God is himself. And yes, he said in 2017 or 2018 that Europe's only faith, only hope is the Christian faith. In principle, of course, as a Bible-believing Christian, I agree. However, what kind of Christian faith, may we ask, does Prime Minister Orban mean? Does he mean the original New Testament-based Christian faith, following Jesus, being washed by his blood, trying to always obey him? Or does he mean that nominal defense? Going to church, regularly reading the Bible, praying, but other than that, practicing one's Christian faith rather little. For example, being lukewarm towards evangelizing, and generally speaking, just going through the motions, talking the talk of the Christian faith, but not really walking the walk. Well, hopefully I'm wrong in these gloomy views, but at least I wouldn't brand Prime Minister Orban as some great 21st century born-again Christian political leader, because I'm not sure if he is even born again. Hopefully he is, and in that case, it would be wonderful if he showed much greater compassion towards his critics and then towards those members of the ethnic and so-called racial and religious minorities who happen to live in Hungary, and that he would not use ethnic, racial, or religious prejudices in his election campaigns, or rather in his election propaganda. Let's read one thoughtful article, apparently from a Hungarian dissident or opposition website, which has made me quite thoughtful as well. Telling the truth comes at a price in Orban's Hungary. This comes from the HungarianSpectrum.org. Website, according to its subtitle, it offers reflections on politics, economics, and culture. And this is a recent post from, or very recent post from February the 9th, 2019. We all have to get used to the shifting reality of the Hungarian media, where the government, through intermediaries and hired hacks, rearranges the media map of the country from one day to the next. When Lajos Simicska, the financial wizard of Fidesz, which is the right-wing populist ruling party of Hungary, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban fell out, the Simicska-owned Magyar Nemzet also bolted and became an objective, government-critical newspaper. Orban loyalists on the staff left, and with government help, established an absolutely servile organ called Magyar Idők. When Simicska no longer was willing to support Magyar Nemzet, he shuttered the paper. This gave Orban the opportunity to lay claim to a well-established brand name and rechristen and perhaps in the process reshape Magyar Idők. Over the years, Magyar Nemzet had a decent reputation as opposed to Magyar Idők, which was practically unreadable, extremist, and at times mostly thanks to Zsolt Bayer vulgar. Viktor Orban was itching to get his paper back, and it says a lot about the man that the name change was timed to coincide with the 4th anniversary of the so-called G-Day, when Simicska, in his outrage, called his old friend by an extremely obscene name. Orban's message was, "You see, I won. You had to surrender. This is what happens to people who stand against me." In connection with this rebranding, let me turn to an event that greatly amused journalists, not in the pay of the government. Mr. István Varga, a former Fidesz member of parliament, who was recently appointed chairman of the new Közép-Európai Sajtó és Média Alapítvány, Central European Press and Media Foundation, gave an interview on a regional television station in Békés County, or maybe province, Varga's home turf. In the interview, he made a grave mistake. He told the truth. The government media, he said, is so bad that even Fidesz loyalists read Index before Origo. He complained that the loyal press frightens people to death and specializes in negative news items. Varga here was most likely talking about all the stories about migrants on a rampage. Perhaps he even had in mind the barrage of negative stories about George Soros. Mind you, one man whom Orban loves to hate. Well, George Soros is a very old, this year turning 89, if he lives long enough, Hungarian Jewish-born, international, well, globalist financier who claims to have made, is it millions of dollars during the world's ongoing financial crisis. And he knows then beforehand which currencies' values are going to rise and which ones are going to fall. This information comes mostly from Tim LaHaye's and Jerry B. Jenkins's book, Are We Living in the End Times? But let's get back to the article. Journalists on the Fidesz side, he said, shouldn't be offended, but first-rate journalists who produce quality journalism are on the other side. Thus, he, as a Fidesz loyalist, subscribes to Élet és Irodalom and reads Magyar Narancs and Népszava. He expressed his hope that as chairman of this new foundation, he would be able to create high-quality Christian national conservative journalism, which currently doesn't exist. I'm sure that Varga was expressing a genuine hope, but what he didn't seem to grasp is that conservative journalists cannot be recruited to support and defend a far-right government. I'm quoting from this journalist, whoever he or she is. 4 hours after the interview, Varga was forced to resign from his new position. Mate Kocsis, leader of the Fidesz parliamentary caucus or group, apparently apologized to the government journalists for Varga's describing them as servile and untalented. He called Varga's criticism unfair and untrue. Why is it unfair? Because we can always count on you, even in the loudest political battles. You are the ones who give us the opportunity to tell the public what we think of the world and the affairs of our country. Varga is not the only Fidesz loyalist who thinks that the media workers assisting the government in its propaganda efforts produce subpar work. Yeah, soon. Several Fidesz politicians admitted to HVG that Varga was right, and they expressed their concern about the low level of journalistic propaganda, which is not only boring but outright painful. In brief, whoever is in charge of communication has gone overboard. An incredible amount of money is poured into television, radio, internet news sites, and newspapers. Very few people watch, listen to, or read. In 2014, Demokrata reported that István Varga was, as a lawyer, representing a collateral descendant of Bálint Hóman, the anti-Semitic minister of education in the second half of the Horthy era. Miklós Horthy, ironically, was an admiral, but his admiral rank came from the days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was the regent or temporary head of state of Hungary from 1920 to 1944, when the country was officially a monarchy. Apparently, Tibor Navracsics, then Minister of Justice, refused to pursue the case. A couple of years later, Varga championed for a reversal of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences decision after the war to revoke Hóman's membership. Wisely, the Academy refused to get involved. Varga's most memorable moment occurred in 2012, when in a parliamentary debate, he uttered the following outrageous opinion. Perhaps the station and role of the family and childbearing should be restored. Perhaps mothers should return to the rearing of children. Perhaps they should be concerned about the too few children being born. Hungary has one of Europe's lowest birth rates. If women had 4 or 5 children, husbands and wives would appreciate each other more, and under these circumstances, domestic violence would be out of the question. The most important duty of women and young ladies is to produce children. After producing 2, 3, or 4 children for the homeland, everybody would be happy, and thereafter everybody could fulfill their own ambitions. Even the very few female Fidesz members of parliament condemned Varga, who eventually tried to appease them with a couple of white roses he hand-delivered. At the time, he insisted that he is a supporter of the emancipation of women. Viktor Orban, who had handpicked Varga for a parliamentary seat, dropped him 4 years later. This time around, he waited less than 4 hours.